Today I'm speaking with Amina. She has been my supervisee for 5 years. She's an independent practitioner. She has a very interesting skill set that she's been trained with Islamic knowledge in Islamic institutions. She's worked with a number of scholars, and she's also a counselor. And we're talking to her about her work today. Hi, Amina.
Hi, Omar. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Amina, as an outsider, a lot of times we don't know what happens in religious communities. So, what are some of the things that people in the religious community, what sort of mental health issues do they come to you for?
So the issues in the religious communities are very similar to the ones that any other person that would be coming into my office would be having. It's just that it's not recognized as a mental health issue. So the integration between mental health and Islam, unfortunately, in this part of the world, is still not there.
You have a very interesting skill set. A lot of times, counselors either will be secular, not bring in religion. If a client brings in even something around religion, the most a counselor could do is just work within their framework, or within religious communities, I'm imagining, which is like you said, that there might be a certain intolerance of counseling related practices. It might be seen as a faith-based question rather than something about human nature or something about emotional health. So how do you integrate these? Is there a clash in your work between these two?
So, Umar, I'll be very honest, it's been a
Mm,
struggle.
mm,
Integration has been a struggle for me and has been sort of a passion because when I started my work of in counseling, it was actually at the insistence of my sheikh who said to me that Amna, people come to me with certain issues and I can help them with faith-based issues, but I know my limitations and I know I can't help them with this because even as a mufti or a scholar, I recognize that this isn't a faith based issue. So we need more faith based people in this work so they have a better understanding or idea of both those things and there can
mm,
be better integration. So that's how I got into this work
mm,
where I saw a huge gap
mm,
because people were confusing mental health with, let's say, lack of iman or lack of faith, and they would go to muftis or scholars and they don't have the answers.
mm,
And I'm really glad that my sheikh actually chose to recognize his limitation, that this is an answer that is, I would say, not in faith, but it's
mm,
a different problem altogether. Like, for example, if you're suffering from a, let's say, heart condition, yes, you should have faith. Yes, you should make dua, give sadaqah, do your zikr, but you cannot say that you don't need to seek the help of a doctor.
mm, mm,
So, actually separating the two helped me with the integration,
mm.
and I'm still struggling because there's a very little work done on it.
Uh-huh. And that's what I would want to know next, which is how do you even separate these two? Where something might be seen as if when someone is coming to you and let's say that they're describing a problem to you, how do you help them differentiate something that's faith-based with something that you're seeing as a counseling related matter?
So when I was not an independent practitioner and I didn't have my space, I would be sitting with let's say a client with my hijab on. So automatically when a person comes in or if they have been referred by, let's say, from somebody from the madrasa who knows me and
Mm,
knows me outside the therapeutic space as faith based,
mm,
so then it's very difficult to separate
mhm,
my faith and what they are coming in for. So I'm very clear that I'm not a religious scholar. And if they have some religious questions, that's not what this space is about. This space is, and quite frankly, they don't know what this space is about. And that's the next struggle. What are they even doing here? So the
mm,
first few session is just to make it client led, figuring out what are we even doing here. And once we define that, then the work can move on. So
mm,
I make it a point that I don't bring in religion until the religion is brought in to the
mm,
session
mm,
by the client.
mm.
So I need to be very mindful of
Yeah.
that.
And that's a very interesting way of looking at that. And I know that you have a very good grip on theory. You've also been teaching counseling courses. So I want to know about that. That Sometimes things that are around patriarchy, or things that are related to maybe other aspects of culturally based shame or something, can very easily sort of take up the shape of something that is religious. Someone might be pedestalized. How would you see the theory and the faith-based topics merging, mixing? How does that work?
So that's a very interesting question, because when you talk about the pedestal and when someone comes in to the space or into my space, it's almost coming in with an expectation that, oh, she has religious knowledge
Mm,
and she has therapeutic knowledge. So they kind of place me here. So, and as humans, Umar, you and I know it's very, I would use the word intoxicating when someone elevates you here. But as therapists, we know that that's part of the work. When someone is projecting you or elevating you into a higher state, they are looking for some sort of magic, and there is no
mm,
magic. So the first thing that we need, what I need to do, is deconstruct that image that they have of me coming into the space. And after that is deconstructed, then we can talk about the shame, which I feel is at the core of most of the reasons why people usually end up on at least in my practice, they are
mm,
struggling with some sort of shame. And how you and I understand shame through the mental health perspective, it is corrosive. It serves no purpose to a person's growth. But when it's combined with religion, it's like
mm,
shame on steroids. So
mm,
it's just explosion. And because there's a big guy, and the idea is that he's shaming us. So
mm,
because I do have that religious knowledge, I know that God doesn't intend to shame us. So I feel I have a little bit more grasp on the struggle that a religious person who is seeking counseling, who
mm.
is breaking that glass ceiling, might be struggling through. So the first few sessions would be around really touching upon and identifying shame.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I'm very interested in knowing more about that, because in a lot of times in our supervision sessions, we work very differently with similar topics. That let's say someone is coming in with something that I identify as shame based. I may be bringing in very different parts of myself. I may be bringing in a very different skill set, and you bring in a very different part of yourself and your skill set. And in our earlier conversation, what you were saying, that the shame that you carry as a woman, as a daughter, as a product of this culture, how are you working with your clients? How much are you bringing in your own self, your own religious parts? If someone's God is very different than your God, then how much are you bringing in your God versus their God? How do you work with that?
So that is a struggle, and as you
Mm,
know, as we've been working, that is where it gets very confusing, and that's when I come running in for supervision.
mm,
And actually, the same way that I come to you for supervision, I'd be calling a scholar.
mm,
I'd be saying, listen, this is the intervention I made, and I'm feeling very scared about saying this. Let's say being angry with God.
mm,
So in the religious community, without context, saying that is not okay. But sometimes with an individual who's not actually angry with God, but is actually angry with the concept of God that was introduced to him.
mm,
So touching upon that is so important, but that person can't touch upon it because they've been told not to ever go there.
mm,
So it's a struggle, and that's the time that I need to bring in my own experience, my own shame, which is something that I've been working on very closely in my own experience as a person, as a counselor. So it really triggers that, if I'm being honest,
mm,
and that's when it gets confusing.
mm,
So the edge that I feel I have is that my own defensive ego doesn't get too shamed by the religious concept that a person is bringing in, because I have that knowledge of the God that, let's say, I'm connecting to, and I'll say
mm,
something like that. That's not the Allah I know.
mm,
And they're like kind of like taken aback that which Allah are you talking about? And then there's a conversation, which Allah are we talking about? Because as we all know, Allah Ta'ala has 99 attributes. So there's Rahman and Rahim, and then there's Jalo Jalal. And there's complete polarity that he introduces himself to us. So then we go with which part of God the person sitting in front of me is relating to.
That's that fascinating work that you are doing, and how I've been able to work with you, that you're bringing in these very difficult polarities that exist in the field, not only between counseling and religion, but within yourself and within two very different professionals, just being able to be tolerant of the process, to be able to look at things from a different lens, that what's a mental health angle here, or what's really something very human here. And I want to know a bit more about that the human element a lot of times can end up being ignored when they're looking at a wider philosophy or a system or something that's a lot bigger than the individual. So how do you bring those voices back to the conversation?
So, Umar, I think the word that you use, tolerance, is the key word. That there needs to
Mm,
be tolerance both in the religious community for this field to exist, and for the mental health community to sort of not leave God at the door, right?
mm,
So, because when I was training early on, I was taught that you need to just leave God out of the room. And the more I worked as a practitioner, I don't find that's possible with people who are faith based, and
mm,
actually not even people who are outwardly faith based or practicing. Religion plays a very big role in all of us, in the average man and the average woman in Lahore. It's just something that we've grown around, whether it's just practices or whether it's messages from the environment. We
mm,
can't separate God from this therapeutic space,
mm,
or their experience of God needs to be addressed.
mm. And that's what you were saying, that there's such a huge void here in someone who has those skills, where you can go to someone who's open to bringing in religion into conversations, yet they can provide that non-judgmental safe space where issues of abuse or issues around religious conflict or shame or misogyny or patriarchy, or how a woman is feeling towards her husband and they're not okay with that, can not only be tolerated, but it can be held with sensitivity. So I want to know about that since you started bringing this in, do you feel that there are other people who've become interested within the religious community?
Absolutely. There's a conversation started on mental health as a separate issue, and I noticed that even in bayans and in talks now, mental
Mm,
health is just put separately to religious faith-based issues. And oftentimes little knowledge is a dangerous thing. That's what I always feel. So a lot of time we have very little religious knowledge, and it's not the knowledge, actually it's the shame that makes it corrosive. Like, for example,
mm,
we've all heard maa baap ke samne uf nahi karna.
mm,
But to what extent? We've just heard this statement, but we don't know uske aage aur uske piche kitna kuch hai. So that's very little knowledge, and that just leads to being able to control a child who's having a difficult relationship with, let's say, her mom, and then everybody saying कि बस सब्र करो. That's not it, and that's not fair, and that's not what faith prescribes either.
mm,
And that's what I feel, people use religion to
mm,
actually fuel their own defensive ego, to really cater to that narcissistic part, to
mm.
justify it.
Mm. You really sort of put your hand on the nerve here, feeling something so special about our culture. Which is, I mean, I in my work I continue to go back to this. If there was one verse or an interpretation of that verse that creates so much dysfunction in our culture, in our families, in our community, would be just this, which is that, help me understand this. Let's say that we were working with someone, which in a clinical sense we might say, here's a very narcissistic mother-in-law, or here's a very narcissistic parent, or and you're working with an individual who's damaged by that parent, but they have a lot of shame around that, which is that, but I'm meant to still follow what my mother is telling me or what my father is telling me. And this abusive figure, they say these things to me, they beat me, they do this, but I'm obligated to sort of still be okay with them and accept them and not say anything to them. How would you be working with an individual?
Yeah, so because they'd be bringing in religion and they would be talking about how religion really or Islam has room to deal with such a person, first of all, I would encourage them to learn more.
Mm,
So there is such emphasis in religion about boundaries, and there's an emphasis on religion on focusing on you, which we forget. So the entirety, if I would put the religious teachings in a little nutshell, it would be your focus is on you. Your focus is on your namaz. Your focus is on how much zakat you give or how much sadaqah you give. It's not looking at the other person. So here's a situation, your mom seems to be very difficult to deal with. What to do? First of all, put the shame aside and then let's talk, and then let's see how much room your faith gives you to deal with
mm,
this. And there's huge room, Umar, honestly.
mm,
And that's what I was saying earlier, that little knowledge is such a dangerous thing. So the
mm,
minimum thing that is required as a Muslim is to say salam. You
mm,
don't have to engage deeply or get trapped into
mm,
that toxic pull that comes with it. So you do your bare minimum, and then what I encourage them to do is to work with me on them,
mm. That's
empowering
beautiful.
them.
Just how the secular concepts of boundaries and containment can be very useful here in this context too, with something that affects, and like you said, an ordinary person. Religion plays an important role in their life. Religion plays an important role in their emotional, social, familial lives, and how you're bringing in similar concepts but within that religious social context, and that can be useful for people. And what I also hear there is you're able to open up that relational space, that instead of that being a very conceptual space, that you're meant to follow this, you're in a non-judgmental way, you're helping people to have their own experiences as well.
Absolutely, and that's what's so misunderstood.
Mm,
Islam encourages us to think, and we've stopped thinking, and it's just that we start following, and the crux of all of that is lack of information. Little information, then that the defensive ego really uses to shame. And again, my uh, mind falls back into how much our mind shames us and uses whatever it has to fuel that shame.
mm. Okay. Do you want to say a bit more about your online community? You were saying that this space that exists and what you're bringing, there's a lot of appetite for this. A lot of people are looking for someone who's able to integrate these two. Want to say a bit more about your online
Yes.
community?
Yeah, so I have a page called Islam and Therapy, which I actually made for this specific reason, to have that integration between Islamic concepts, and then therapy. And what led me to start this community was my research project actually, which was, whose shame are we carrying anyways? Is it God
Mm,
shaming us, or is it transgenerational shame that's passed on like a hot potato from
mm,
person to person? So I made this community to really speak to people about their experience of being Pakistani, and how they have coped with, or what their experience of religious shame is. So I'm still learning. I'm still connecting with scholars. I'm still on this journey myself. I don't claim to have the answers to all of it, but it's something that's very close to my heart. And every time I like see an Islamic concept that is like the therapeutic concept that
mm,
I've learned about, I like integrate that or say something about that or make a post around that, in hopes that it is not seen as polarities, but just as different areas of our human existence. We need our faith for our own, not like what they call this real self in religious
mm,
circles is enough. So we need
mm.
certain things to fuel our real self.
Okay. This is such a rich space, bringing these in, especially for people who are looking for some of those answers that they may not find with just religious scholars, and having that allowance for them, that they're in recent years, if they're more encouraging of people like you coming in, learning a secular skill set, trying to integrate that within faith-based communities, going back to those communities, being able to discriminate mental health issues from faith-based questions, learning more, and spoken like a true counselor, which is still being able to say, I'm still learning, I don't know much. It's been wonderful chatting with you, Amina. I hope we can have another chat.
Thank you, Umar. It was lovely having being here.